Okay, in the last video I spoke about the will and how the will is our problem, how perception is like a wall or a barrier between us and self-realization. So I spoke about how there's three planes of being: the mental, emotional, and physical, and how they interact with each other and change each other. For example, if I yell at you, you feel, then you think, then you might act physically. If I push you physically, you'll react emotionally and think, and then react physically again. Or if I make you think, then you might react emotionally and then physically, or whatever. So whichever way it goes, no matter how you're stimulated or whatever you perceive or whatever perception event occurs, whether it's mental, emotional, or physical, it will change your consciousness because the mix changes of the three different pressures, different aspects of being. So this video is about that. The heading is a yogic explanation of the triplicit, triple that is, nature of human consciousness. So here we go. So we tend to think of ourselves as a single being. This is not quite true, as there are three modes of being or bodies that form what might be called a triplicit consciousness. As I said, the three are: 1. The me I refers to as self when I say to myself, I thought that. The I reference in this sentence is the mental body. 2. The me I refer to as self when I say to myself, I feel. This one is called the emotional body. And then there's the me I refer to as self when I say to myself, I will do that. Here we refer to the physical body. Pretty self-explanatory, I would think. So, who is it inside me that is referring to my me as itself? If I say to you, like I said in the other video, visualize an orange and stand back and notice that you're noticing it, and then notice that you're noticing yourself noticing it, that's the one who's referring to the me and I as itself. And because it's referring, it's simply not the me or the I. The I-me thoughts, or any thoughts, are only relative to everything exterior, as if there was an exterior, but there really isn't, because consciousness is ubiquitous, infinite light, both inside and outside, such that there's no inside or outside. So, is there a fourth me inside me? There must be. I mean, who's referring to me or I as self? The mystery of the subtle I. This is the idea we have of us that we can't really see, but we say I or me, and attached to that is all the attributes of I. I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I'm a racing car driver, I'm a mother, I'm a child, I'm whatever. That's the I reference. And that I reference has those three levels. So while there's no actual mental body or no actual physical, spiritual representation of a physical body, and there's no real emotional body that anyone can find apart from the energy signature. So those three together, combined, make up the subtle I. So this is the small guy in there. He's that subtle I, the reference. I've depicted him this way so that we can visualize him. And then you've got who he thinks he is as the human body, or the physical form. Now, notice this. The outer reality, the field outside of him, seems to be appearing in his mind. But we'll see later that he's actually projecting that from within this sphere of light. That sphere of light is the consciousness actually creating the outer reality through the, let's use the word apparatus, of the physical being. And we'll get to why that's so in a minute. Okay, so you note these rays going up here. There's only a few of them at the moment, but I've got another image coming which has got over 100. Now, each one of those rays of light create a certain aspect of the outer reality, just like a the electron gun of the back of your TV. It shoots these rays onto the back of the TV screen, and there's thousands and thousands of them, and they form the picture. The same thing happens with outer reality and inner reality. See that? So we'll see how that works in a moment. So moving on. These three natures, one, that's the outer reality, himself, and the inner reality, the natures, form a triangle within which we live and have our being. In other words, there has to be somewhere within which we exist, or where are we going to exist? So that those natures actually form the triangle, which is like the three-dimensional reality of being that we experience as our world. So how does perception create the individual self? Well, we've seen, I described a little moment ago how those beams of light go out and create the exterior reality, but perception does the same thing, but inwardly. So it's like a bounce back of light that builds this perceptor, the percept of self. That's the one who perceives that something changed. It's the memory self. So we have this percept of self that's prior to the composition of the incoming data into a perception of the outer reality. So that's the percept. That's how perception creates the individual self. Because each moment, that individual self is changed by the experience of the outer reality, and the data coming in is added to and added to, like I described in the last video. The onion layers are built up. I'll pull that down a little bit. Get a bit of a picture there. There you go. Okay, so moving on. So here we have our young fellow again. Now, this body here represents who you think you are as a body. You don't think, that thought just appears because this is projected. So it's like a reflection in consciousness of your projection. But you don't project it either. It's caused by the way consciousness bounces back perception or consciousness of itself. So this picture in his mind represents the appearance of the mind as perception happens. Now that means every moment the mind is coming into being and being added to and changed by perception, and nobody's got any control over that unless you're dead. So when we're asleep, that's missing, but there's only 25% of that from our senses that are awake a little bit. For example, somebody knocks on the door. If you weren't awake 25%, you wouldn't hear it. Now the other 75% that's missing is filled up by the memory, and that's dream. Right? So you have the dream reality validated by the outer reality, like it's 75-25. Now on the other side of it, when we're awake, it's 25% memory and 75% perceptual data from the senses. But if you ask me what I did yesterday, then that slides down into the 40-50 into the memory state, and then I might be 50% aware of what's going on outside me while I search my memory for what you want me to tell you I did yesterday or how I felt about what happened yesterday. So we shift back and forward between the dream state and the waking state, and there's no real point where we stop, we shift, right? So our perception is constantly altering. Our consciousness is constantly moving and altering, because that's the nature of consciousness. It moves and shifts like this. But it doesn't just move in a linear sense, it expands and contracts. Like it expands more into the outer reality, or it contracts into the inner reality. So that's how it works. It's not linear. Like each line you see in this picture here, you could say is a timeline. For example, it takes less time to reach here than it does to reach way out there. So these timelines mean that perception and the mind is time. Time is mind and mind is time. Or consciousness is actually time in motion. That's exactly what it is. In other words, it's light in the process of shining. And we'll get further into that in a moment. So the picture represents the mind as perception happens. The little fella represents your concept of who you are, or your conceptual I, this guy here, this small person. Right? Now that would imply that you're none of these, but something other which is aware of each of these in its own self. It's not exactly in any self, it's projected from within. So however, it's not in any individual self. All selves are in it. They're projected into it, right? So the selves that appear in everyone's mind are projections from within this. They're like various identities of God, if you like. The iconography of this Hinduism, where they have hundreds of pictures of Krishna, one behind the other, or one of the other gods, that go back forever. It means that the iconography means that God is everyone and everything at every level of being. So this is what's happening in all of us. These subtle eyes are all different in all of us. And they're like that hierarchy of God that goes back into forever and like this. Yeah. So the more focused you are on the individual self, the more limited your consciousness is. So that's what that little guy is. Okay, so however, look, I'll read that again. It's not in any individual self. All the selves are in it, as it is the same awareness that is aware of all selves and all beings. In other words, it's the omniscient, omnipresent God who's existing in us, in every being, not just humans or beings on this earth or dimensional plane of existence. All beings on all levels are the same being. Like, I mean, the inner being's the same being. Okay, so this light here represents the consciousness glowing in the one you refer to as you. That's this here. Now, someone will say, oh, that's the intellect, that's the sun of the intellect, it's like the third eye. It is actually the third eye because it's what's aware. But you'll see that it's focused in the being, as if it has to be this tiny little speck to fit inside his head, okay? But this infinitesimally point of light has been called a bindu, like a seed, bija, soul, or point of consciousness. It's the origin of the individual consciousness, that little bindu there. But it's like there's a pinhole in a balloon that's full of all the light in the universe. And that pinhole is sort of like that bindu in this guy's head. So the light is infinite behind that, but it's shining through a pinhole there. And that's focused down into the life to become the life of this being. So when that stops or dies, rather when the connection breaks, like the organism, the apparatus breaks, or one of the systems in the body shut down, then the connections break. And just as an aside to that, there's something quite fascinating, and in that yoga, all yoga people and teachers talk about pranayama and the breath, but what's not really told, or I don't know how many people think about it, but what happens is this. Spiritual energy is a bit like electricity. It needs a conductivity, a good conduct, a good contact. The contacts have to be clean. Like if you put your battery leads on your car and they're not clean, it won't transmit the spark properly. And along with that, if the electrolyte in the battery isn't at the right pH level of acidity, the electrons won't transfer from one cathode to the anode, from the cathode to the anode. That means from the positive to the negative. The electrons won't transfer. And then you can't draw power off the battery. Now, the human body is an electrochemically driven machine, but it's spiritual energy. But they say it's electricity. It's probably, we can't prove it, but I think electricity is actually spirit. But anyway, so in the brain there's the synaptic jump across the neurons, where you'll see the spark of the energy. That's what they read when they read the brain activity in the lab. So when that activity stops, we die. Now, how this works is this. Our breath, we breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide. When you put those together chemically, you get hydrochloric acid. That's the acid in our body. This creates the balance in the white blood cells and the red blood cells. If we don't breathe properly, we don't have the right electrolyte, so the spiritual energy doesn't transmit properly through our body, and that's how it works. So that's what's going on there. It's quite fascinating. There's a science related to that. The electrophysiology, it's called. They're studying it now. It's a brand new science. So trying to map how the electrical system works in the body and the brain, and how it affects consciousness and emotions and so on. So they're studying that now, but yoga knows about this for 7,000 years. So, well, here we are. So this infinitesimally point of light has been called the bindu, bija, soul, or point of consciousness. It's the origin of individual consciousness. In other words, the quality of individual consciousness is dependent upon all of those factors, electrochemically, the breathing. If you don't eat the right food, then you have the wrong balances of minerals and supplements and all that, elements and so on, and you don't get the transmission of the right energy. That's why you've got sattvic food, rajasic food, and tamasic food. Rajasic's for people who are non-spiritual, tamasic's for people who are learning, and sattvic is for people who are like supposedly yogis. But consciousness is able to transcend those levels. We'll get into that another time, but let's just move on. So we're never wholly or completely identified with one of these. There always remains an aware self, noticing or witnessing the play of consciousness. So no matter what's going on in here, there's someone who's aware of it, but we may not be able to notice or find out who it is. That self is the true self. Now we'll go a little bit sideways with this, and that is that different religions, adherents and people who are really into that meditation, like Muhammad went into a cave, Jesus went up to the mountain, Noah went up to the mountain, they all saw different things, and the different people throughout time have realized God in a different way. So it means only whatever religion that's the adherents have realized God in, God will appear in the form that they can relate to from within their religion. Excuse me. So it means that every religion is valid in the fact that the people who are subscribed to it and are involved in it, it's useful for them. It's where they're at in their evolution of consciousness or their state of awakening. That might lead one to think that there's a point where we've reached the top of the tree and there's a higher religion than any other religion, but we're beyond religion. We're talking about awakening into the infinite consciousness by degrees. So there's many paths up the mountain. Doesn't matter which one you take, and all are equal. So there's no bigotry, no racism, no judgment. It's all God. Yeah, so we're never wholly identified with any one of these fellas here. Yeah, so let's go forward. So, okay. So notice the rays radiating or shining in every direction. These then become planes of being or vectors of time. So each ray is composed of points of light. Like a pencil line is composed of many, many points. Because of the time frame to draw a line this long, it sort of gets these points, but they're joined together because the points are microscopic. You get a microscope, bring it down, you can see those points. So the light expands out of this self like that. I've only put a couple of hundred here, or whatever. So each line represents a timeline. Each timeline has a history that reaches back to the beginning of time. It means every single point on that line, every single point on that line is shining like this bindu in his head, in every direction. So there are multiplicit quadrillions of expanding balls of light like this bindu in this fellow's head going on all the time. So this is what's occurring. So what we've got here is a really big shining forth of the light out of this bindu, and each light ray creates the background, the image. Each contains a part of the image, like a packet of data. Like when we're on the internet and we ask for Google, it sends what they call packets of data that of themselves don't mean anything, but when they come back to the computer that called from, say, Australia to America, the software in the computer recompiles those data into the pictures we see on our screen, and we hear people, or we see a movie, or it's transmitted through the airwaves and we watch television, but it's transmitted as packets of data. So all of these lines of light coming out of this bindu in this consciousness here are actually building up reality around him. So it means that the consciousness is manifesting all these rays, building up the image, so there is nothing but consciousness. And there's no mind either, because the mind is also consciousness. So there's no difference between the light and what's appearing over here in the background, over on the other side of the field there. Now, if we then think, oh, I'm this guy here at the front looking at the field, then he has to have a history that reaches back to forever rather, to the beginning of the human race, so he could genetically evolve to be standing in that paddock where they've used farming equipment and all the technology that had to be discovered right throughout time, like how to melt steel, how to fabricate rubber, all the things that go together to build the technological marvels we have today. The whole history of the universe had to exist. So each particle of everything that exists contains the whole of time within it. So that means that every single window or particle of consciousness contains infinite universes within every particle, which means there's really only one particle. Because if you get the original shining like that there in his head, then out come all these infinity to the power of infinity multiplied by infinity numbers of bindus of consciousness shining in the same way the first one did. Now that's the quantum particle that I'm putting it forth and showing you how it works in this image. So it's quite amazing. So, though there are infinite rays, I've depicted an array of 100 or so to illustrate how the perceivable reality is built up like pixels on the screen. In this case, the infinite awareness is that screen. Okay. So the light emanating from the infinite background behind this little dot in his head becomes the bindu when it's focused through the soul or eye, and then flashes out like a laser light and builds up the outer reality. The same exact thing is happening in the monitor you're watching. The image is blasted onto the back of the screen, electron by electron, and to build up what you see. You see me there, that's made of electrons. Every particle of light. And each particle of light is one of these bindus of consciousness. That means consciousness is contiguous, ubiquitous, and omnipresent everywhere. You can see how that works by this image. If you could imagine the light being behind this bright light in his head, and that's a pinhole into the reality, and the fabric of the outer reality is like an image that's appearing on the background of light. That's how it works. Mr. Einstein said, there's no such thing as matter, there's only light slowing down. And he's right, and there it is. We've described it, shown how it works very simply. Okay, so moving on. So the rays spin and pulse as our attention moves from one point to another, creating an effervescent manifestation of ever-expanding conscious light. As I've described here, it's expanding forever. Now, as I said, each particle of each ray is shining exponentially like this one, but we can't depict that, so we'd have to be a white screen, like in the old days when they had cathode rays TVs. the white noise, yeah, so that's all you'd have. But yeah, using these tools we've got today, this technology, we have the ability to depict and describe things very easily. Okay, so that's that. Now, we've said how perception creates individual self. Okay, so moving on. So at the deepest level of the eye consciousness here, right, there's a reference to the subtle eye itself. So this guy here, even if you find out that this is, or believe or understand this intellectually, that this is all consciousness, right? There's still, I know this, the I know, I think, I perceive. So that is the reference to the subtle I we're referring to in this first paragraph up here. So he is implied as existing due to the reference to the body consciousness as self. In other words, I-ness. Okay, the I consciousness. So the next thing that happens is that the I thought arises, and the thought I am, I feel, or I do plays its part in our hiding reality from us. So note the three dimensions of being that are depicted in the image here, right? There's the outer reality, there's him, there's the inner reality, and there's the fourth guy we referred to in the first, whoops, need to go back. So previous. So referred to in the first instance of there being another self that's watching, a fourth guy on the who is he? We've got to find out, okay? So appearing in no particular order here, so here's the complete entity instantiated as that I of three states called me. That's me. Like I've got all these me's in me. Come back forever. Okay. So this guy here is that about which it is said, or rather this light is that about which it is said, this is my soul, by reference though, unspoken to the triple body composite as self. So it's like saying, my soul. So who's the person in the word my here? If I'm looking at the soul, there has to be someone else believing that he owns it. Who's the owner? So we're going to find that out too. So, I feel it in my soul. Who's this one that feels? I think. Who is that thinker? Okay. So the subtle I depicted in this image. This self is composed of 3 modes of consciousness. This guy here. He doesn't exist as such. It's just the 3 different levels of energy that create or imply that he exists. So he's composed of the 3 modes of consciousness: physical, mental, and emotional consciousness. Okay. So as the rays of light depart from the center, they form angles, like from here to here. Okay. And vectors of presence. So if I go in this direction, it's if I project tomorrow and think, oh, if I go in that direction, then I'm present, putting myself in the presence of tomorrow, and I analyze that and say, no, I don't want to go that. So I come back, I might go that way. So these vectors of consciousness that have planes of reference that expand, like the vectors an aircraft travels in, or how we are triangulated by a GPS. That's how that works. So we triangulate where we are in the consciousness by this vectoring. That's how it works. And the center of the vector angle is the eye reference, you see. But it goes back so deep to the level of the soul, this vectoring. Okay, so where are we? Okay, there. So that's what this means. So the vectors of presence, each line being composed of countless other points of conscious light. So there you are. So we'll change this up a bit. Now this is one vector, okay, where there's an emotional plane, a mental plane, and a physical plane, which give reference to I'm going to think, feel, or do, okay. Or as I said earlier, if I touch this side of the triangle here, or that one, then the opposite one's affected over here, and the plane on the bottom's affected by both. So no matter where I try to touch this, it's going to affect him inside there. What he'll do, if say I touch it here, then his attention's going to go to here, his emotional state's going to be affected, and his physical state's going to be reacting to that. So moving on, you'll see how this works. It's pretty cool. So the 3 planes form a triangle like that, within which we live and have our being, and we're trapped in that triangle until we understand how to get out. So I'm going to show you how to get out. You won't be a victim anymore. So the mental plane is who he identifies as self when he perceives a thought. So say he thinks, something makes him think about, I don't know, his mother. Now there's an emotional content to that, but he's thinking because stimulation was thought initially. So he'll go and have the mental, and then he'll move his attention over to the emotional, which might make him go and see his mother, physically. So who he identifies with as a physical being, he goes off to see his mum, right? So here he starts to feel, oh, mum needs me. So he starts to feel responsible because he was stimulated to think. So he's affected in all modes, no matter what happens. See that? So that's how it works there. So we're never wholly or completely any one of these 3. We flash in and out of being, meaning, as per the star in the last couple of images, we race here and to and fro in this triangle, and we're always racing around somewhere trying to fix something. It's like trying to shove a balloon into a tiny little bag, and the balloon keeps popping out. You can't get the damn thing to stay put. Or you've seen that Magilla gorilla show where the monkey's got the gorilla and he puts him in a suitcase and kicks him in one end and he comes out the other. Anyway, you're moving on. My Aussie humour there. So this is how it works. So put force there, transfers, no matter what you do, no matter where you apply force, it transfers the other 2 planes. It's absolutely unavoidable and it's inevitable. Because you can't touch a triangle, not even with a micro soft touch, without affecting it in its other planes. So if we live within this triangle, we're always going to be a victim of what's going on around us, i.e. our perception. So the effect of the forces that come into being as a result of the effect that reality has upon each plane of perception. See, these are planes of perception. They're emotional, so we react emotionally to things. We react mentally because perception and stimulus makes us think, and the same with the physical, right? So reality has an effect upon each plane of perception. This defines a body within that field of consciousness that defines who we are in the now. We change moment by moment because of perception. That's why we can never get rid of the ego, because the ego is mercurial. You can kill it and then the next thing you perceive it'll come back again. So trying to kill it's a fool's game. It's like the stories of Krishna being the actor in all fields and being indomitable. It's the fact that you can't kill him because he's the ego. He's the driver of the chariot. He's Arjuna's driver. Arjuna's the perfect man, so to speak, who's achieved realization of God in yoga, and Krishna's the driver of the chariot that's been driving him toward God ever since he began his sadhana. So although the ego seems evil, Krishna is depicted as a real trickster, and he is, man. You can't beat Krishna. So he can behave exactly how he wants because he's God. He doesn't know the difference. He's just doing what's necessary to make us grow. And that's what he does. And he does it, with consummate expertise. It's incredible. So that's what's going on here. So moving on. So the mystery of the beginning of suffering. Interesting. So there's a mental plane, emotional plane, physical plane again. So it doesn't matter how or where I put pressure on myself, I'll still affect the other two planes of my consciousness. So regardless of its inside or outside pressure, it still affects the inside consciousness, the result. It's like the quantum of the energy changes the outcome. That's how it works. So it means the mass or composite or combination of the three energies is always going to affect us. Always. It's always going to affect our consciousness. Because it is consciousness. If it didn't affect you, you would be dead. You wouldn't be conscious. So messing around with this process of consciousness is what causes our suffering. That causes it. I'll show you why in a minute. Okay, so suffering comes into being the very moment that the idea of me or I arises. Why, I wonder why that might be. Well, because you change constantly due to every moment or nanosecond of perception, who you think you are is always changing, but you fight to keep him the same as he was yesterday. And that's your problem right there in a nutshell. When you try to be I, that you can refer to, that will always be a past self. Always. Because there's no me in now. In this now, there's no me. There's no I, and there's no future. It hasn't occurred. Future hasn't come yet. The past has gone back into the past. So yesterday doesn't exist. In fact, because of the way these rays of consciousness expand out of us, the minute we move one micrometer from, if I turn my head, just a millimeter or micrometer, micrometer, right? If I move like that, then what I was looking at has now disappeared forever. That's the past. Where I was looking there, that's the past. If I turn around, yeah, see, I'm looking in the mirror, in the camera there, and the door behind me and the chakra sheet appearing over there, right? That's behind me. It's in the past, right? And the camera's picking it up. That's how cameras work. They pick up light, which is traveling. So, but to me, the watching consciousness, because I'm forward looking, doesn't exist until I turn around. What I'm looking at is memory, the past. So when I turn around, it changes. So every time my eyes move 1 millimeter or my face or head moves like that, a whole new universe is coming to being instantaneously. It's incredible. So moving on. So, okay. Now, see this cube up here on the right? This little cube with a ball inside it with all these energy lines. And this is a mathematical representation of the instantiation or positionality of that sphere inside the cube coming into being because of the multiplicit vectors of all these energy lines or light. So it's shining, right? This is the mathematical equation that you can nut out if you're a genius that describes this mathematically. So it's all there. I'm not a mathematician, but I thought this was pretty cool to put that on there. And those people who can understand it, it's there for them. Okay, so there's a science behind it, and if we look at vector science, it describes precisely how this works. Okay, so moving on. So the combination of forces instantaneously create a concentrated point of focus. So that means pressure here and like there, the sum of the forces transfer brings a point of reference to, say, here where the cursor is. That's what this ball means inside this cube. So the force transfers, and because of the different forces transferring back through the triangle, create a pool or vector of force that might be there, for example, depending on where the triangle was touched out there. Now, that will move him to there, you see? So that's what moves our attention around. That force of experience through consciousness moves our attention around automatically. What we're trying to do in yoga is not be affected by this. But as long as you identify, you're going to be affected. So I'm going to show you how that works and how to get out of that little prison that's triangular there. Okay, so moving on. Whoa, you've seen this before on my website. So I say up here, the existence of the spiritual plane becomes apparent only after a degree of harmony is achieved. That's because you get thrown around inside that triangle like the last image described. And because you're thrown around, your attention is on that spot. So you can't see the truth. You can be told it, you can believe in it, but you can't perceive it or experience it because you're doing other stuff over here toward the mental plane or toward the emotional plane. Now, not only does it move sideways and back like a pendulum, these little pendulum ends move up and down the line of their travel. So it might be over here at one point, this one, like those ones up there that are green. Yeah. Or this guy here might be over there. Yeah. So this is positive, this is negative. So it says here, trying to bring the pendulum to the positive is to validate its opposite. So as I said with my fingers in the last video, this positive is negative in context of that. So if you think this is positive, then that's negative. So if you believe that how you feel is how you should feel, in other words, guilty or whatever, then you make the positive negative. So you screw yourself up. I want to be smarter, less emotional. Or I want to be less emotional and smarter. Okay? Or I want to be more centered. So I'll try and fight that. That creates the opposite force instantly. As soon as you fight it, as soon as you try to be anything, as soon as you try to become anything. I once saw a really old show on TV that used to be on called The Monkey King. Anyway, the priest says to him, become nothing. Don't become anything. But how do you become nothing? Are you already nothing? Become nothing. In other words, don't become anything. So it gets a bit confusing. So these riddles that these great masters of the ages past have shared with us can be confusing. So we're going to shed some light on some of those as well while we're at it here. So trying to be positive and trying to correct the negative creates the force you fight. You cannot do anything because you're doing it because you're, say, here on the positive side of the pendulum swing, or you're over there on the negative, and as soon as you do that, you create the opposite force, so you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. So what you've got to do is let go of both sides. Just drop it. And the triangle disappears, collapses, and you're free. Let go. Yeah? Let go and let God. Just drop it. And then this whole sphere of being opens up and this whole thing disappears and it's irrelevant, you chuck it in the bin. So you practice this letting go by not trying to get the positive, not trying to fix the negative, not trying to win anything, not trying to achieve anything, but not being indifferent. You're being proactive in the fact that your action is in letting go, right? Now, one might say, if I try to let go, isn't that my ego trying that? No, because the ego doesn't want to let go. The ego is one of these negative positions, right? To get the desire to want to let go. Sri Dattatreya in the Abhidharma Gita says, you know, I forgot what I was going to say. It'll come to me in a minute. So you can't let go yourself. I mean, the ego can't let go, right? Oh, he said this. He said, the desire for liberation arises in great men by the grace of God, and not otherwise. Now, the grace of God is you have the desire to choose to let go, or to not take the step over that line you've drawn in the sand, which is the center here. Okay, I did it again. It's a little tricky with these PowerPoint images. I'll get used to it over time. But anyway, so moving on. So an explanation of the triplicit nature of human consciousness. So that which appears to be my me reacts, and thoughts just appear as if by magic. These are thoughts, okay? Now, each thought has a relativity to each other plane, like a degree of effect, if you like, or it has connotations to us emotionally and physically. Say that one, for example. They're not just thoughts, they also have connotations to other thoughts, and that's the connections your brain makes. For example, if I say yellow, you might think of a banana or the sun. Or, you know, if I say red, you might think of a red Ferrari or something. Okay, so, and then the emotional content of having a Ferrari, blah, blah, blah. So, I think, but I don't. Oh my God. Oh my God. How's that work? Very simply. Thoughts happen. There's one in your head. I put it there. Nobody thinks, they happen. So if you think, I think this, and Bindu hasn't done anything yet, and I've been thinking my whole life, your thought began when you first started to think when you were a little kid, and it's been going on ever since, and each thought has been bouncing off the other, and you've got no choice but to think. So consciousness is flowing through us as thoughts. We don't have to touch every rock the river flows past. You know? Or we can stand on the bank, to put it another way, and watch the river flowing and washing all the flotsam and jetsam down the river. We don't have to jump in and chase the logs and the frogs and the dogs and whatever else is floating past. We don't have to chase the clouds in the sky as they go by. The sky remains the same when the clouds are gone. You've got to be like that sky. Just watch. Realize that your mind and your being is absolutely infinite. Okay, so I think, but I don't think. But who's the I that thinks? That's back to the reference to me as self. Okay, so the three planes form a triangle again, within which we have our being. So we're driven to and fro within the triangle, chasing the atoms of possibility that we perceive in new things, people, places, events, and circumstances. So, oh, she's nice. Oh, look at him, he's handsome. Yeah? Well, if I do that, I'll be successful. Oh, I want to buy one of those. See me becoming successful. That's you. So, me, there's your goal. Something really cool, right? So this heart inside this ball of possibility, let's use that word, wants to express itself and I can't think of the right word, like predetermined, self-determined. It wants to be self-determinant in its life. So you have this inside you, this want, this desire to validate you, to have fun from outside you. You get the fun from outside you. Like if I get that goal, I'll feel great. If I have success, I'll feel great, etc. If I buy that, I'll feel better, blah, blah. So it's all within the triangle. Right? So we're looking for love or joy for a while things go well, then we realize we've made a mistake. For example, we think he's cool or she's cool or that goal will be great, but it's only temporary. And we always run out of joy, like we exhaust it, like we suck it dry like a husk of an orange or something. And there's nothing. We have to go and find something else again because we're looking for joy from outside. Why do we do anything? We want love, all of us. We want joy. We want the joy out of it. The first joy we experienced was when we were conceived. Between the joy of your mother and the joy of your father, or joy itself on one-sidedness, could have been rape, but there's joy there. Selfish joy, but it's still joy. The source of everything is joy. So from that, as I said in the last video, is the doubling of the cells and the being's born. And then everything goes from there. Then the parents might be horrible people, so they stymie the joy of the newborn baby or whatever. And all the victimization starts and different modes of being, blah, blah. We won't go there today. We're keeping it down into how this works. So none of these resemble what I'm looking for, because I'm looking for myself. And that's why we go, oh, I've made a mistake. The ego looks for validation from itself, from other people, from things outside itself. And most, great many relationships are founded on that need for validation. The reason is that the ego can't validate itself because it's not real. So it has no self-nature, no consciousness. It's an idea at best, and it's empty of self. So it needs validation from outside. In other words, it needs to be pushed around by the energies from outside the triangle in order to think that what gets instantiated as that sum of force at a particular position within the triangle, it identifies with that pool of energy as self. But when that new thing comes, it changes that point of energy over to the middle, for example, and it changes in intensity. So it changes in terms of experience, and it thinks it's experiencing something, but it's not. It's only the change in energy. Try and understand that. Okay, so the three planes form a triangle again. Okay, we're trapped and can't get out of this if we try to get out of it from within it. Because the same thing happens when we try to get out of it. We reference a point and then go that way, sort of go toward the top. And the next thing that happens is the other two react and we're trapped again because it instantiates us somewhere in the triangle again. We try to go over there, but we're flung back here, for example. That's how it works. So you're trapped because of the energy quanta. So, okay. As we all know, perception of any event or thing outside our body affects our state of being. Yet what is not obvious, that obvious rather, is that due to the fact that our attention moves in our being, it moves into other planes of being. For example, the relativity of this perception event down here changes your perception of where you are in terms of the exterior reality. So that's a plane of existence that's different than one up there. There's more spiritual up here. You see? So it narrows down like that. Yeah? That's what happens. So we're flung about by these external and internal energy events. And we perceive and react to these perceptions as well as the perceptions outside us. So what are we going to do? Okay, so moving on. Because of the effect that his latest perception has upon the self, that he remembers as himself, his perception of himself changes. This frightens him. So he rushes to the point of impact, where that locus of energy is. He sends his attention to that because he's addicted to the idea that he is what's instantiated by the energy quanta. So his very perception terrifies him because he knows it's going to change. So he tries to control the outer reality and how he reacts to the outer reality. You see, but that's his prison. So his perception is his problem. And his will or lack of control, self-control internally, is the reason why he's a victim. So he's flung all over, there he is up there at the top there. He's flung up there, but then he spots two more perception events. So he's thinking about blah, blah. So he gets all confused, but these lines are infinite. I'm just to put it this way so it's simple to understand. Okay. So you get the feedback stimulus. This is a image I got out of Facebook. It's close to what I'm describing. So there's the idea, then there's the potential feedback. The black background represents the physical plane. I put that there. But this is the original image. Right? So the courage to change and the willpower equals the guts. Right? So the energy quanta, which isn't described by this triangle, moves you to there, or there, or there, or there. So these triangles just move in relation like a kid's toy that when you move the triangle around, it folds up. Like one of those balls that expand when you pull it, made out of bits of plastic. Yeah, so thought, emotion, feedback, that's what happens. So you swing back and forward on that pendulum plane. Okay, so this is pretty much the same thing. So he's a victim of his own perception. Because we react and because we also perceive and react to our own perception. So that explains why we suffer so much mentally and physically. Mentally and emotionally. So he doesn't realize that the energy field that is comprised of the three energy vectors of force define who he thinks he is. He doesn't realize that. We don't realize that. Right? As the energy field, he tries to control himself. So as the energy field. So he's one of these energy fields and he tries to control himself, which creates an energy wave that affects everything else. So he can't do anything about it. He cannot get out of there if he thinks he exists. Right? Because his own energy or will makes a mess of it. So that's why we're constantly in trouble spiritually, because we run around inside ourselves like the cat on a hot tin roof. Aussie saying. When the tin roof's hot in Aussie, man, you can't get up there, it'll kill you. So the cat runs about when it's in, oh gee, my feet are hot, hot foot, jumps off the roof. So he jumps off the cliff, this guy in the triangle, in some fashion or form, in some way. So yeah, moving on. So this sphere represents one of those perception events expanded. You see how it's different colors. That means it's different feelings, different emotions, different thoughts, like a rainbow. And the colors change like this. They sweep back and forward like an ocean of rainbow-colored water, according to the balance of mental, emotional, and physical experience and perception. So this is the Bindu. And it gets whiter and brighter the more spiritual you get, because the white light is the source of all light. And when you put white light through a prism, you see all the other colors. So there it is. So when a perception event occurs, it's moved to the level and point that the perception event indicates in terms of threat to who we perceive ourselves to be in the past. E.g., it retriangulates our position in time. What I mean is, an experience now gives reference to something that happened that's similar in the past. So the emotion from that area in the past also plays a part in how we feel now in context of a new experience. For example, we meet someone and we think, oh, that's a nice person. I might be able to have a relationship with this person. And then we feel this good. And that's because it matches something we felt in the past. Now, if we've... as Joe Dispenza put it, if we are addicted to a certain way of feeling or have felt it for such a long time, we're comfortable feeling that way. So we'll feel, oh, this guy's my type or this girl's my type. And because he or she will contribute to making us feel how we used to feel or how we feel when we're comfortable being ourselves. So according to the light there, the colors, that affects us emotionally. So emotions all have a color. Everything has a color. Music has a color. Tone has a color. You study Kabbalah, it's quite fascinating. Yeah, so there you are. So yeah, moving on. So this is self-consciousness is undeniably affected by proximity. In other words, when someone comes into your comfort zone, it's going to affect your consciousness whether they touch you or not. So, I mean, you're damned inside, you're damned by the vector of your own consciousness, and you're affected by everyone else that comes around you. Wow. So the plot thickens. But I'm going to show you how to get out of it. Don't worry. Okay, off we go. Because of the effect of his latest perception it has upon who he thinks he is, his perception of himself changes because of who came here. He wonders if she's looking at him. That changes his thought and his perception of himself. He tries to clean up his act. He might say, oh, I'm not going to swear if she talks to me, or, oh, look at my hair, I've got like this, I'm going to have a shave, or some such, like that, you know, because he thinks, I want her to look at me, or I want to get along with this person, or, you know, if I offend my boss, he'll, you know, sack me or something. Or, God, don't look at the guy in that car, he might shoot me in America. Yeah, right. So perception about her, not just physically pushing you or yelling at you or making you think by saying all this stuff I'm talking about, but just the proximity of someone else in your space affects you. That's why we've all got this comfort zone. Don't you dare come inside my personal space, because you'll upset who I think I am. I'll have to change, I'll have to head off the effect you're having on me. So we're all paranoid. We're in this paranoia consciousness because it's changing who we think we are. So we basically run on fear. Okay. So we go back again. Because of the effect his latest perception has upon who he thinks he is, his perception of himself changes, it frightens him, so he rushes to the point of impact via paying attention to the plane of origination. In other words, here, he becomes emotional. Now, if he's a person that doesn't have much control over his emotions, it can throw him into a spin for weeks, months even. Someone with psychological problems, it can screw them up psychologically for months. PTSD is an example, you know, wars and all that, it screws us up because of what effects these waves of energy have upon our perception of ourselves, and that's why we get all messed up. Okay. Now, the key to it then is to figure out how to, let's say, bleed the energy away so it doesn't affect us before it affects us. So that's what I'm going to show you how to do. Okay. So here I've added this sprockety thing and a color wheel. Now, if you think of each angle as one of the vectors but turned around, that's an incoming vector. That's an outgoing vector, right? So you've got outgoing vectors and incoming vectors, right? So outgoing is like a clock. This turns, and these are points of reference outside you. Like if I go in that direction, so I'll act in whatever this one represents and go that way, etc. So alignment of your will with a particular mode of consciousness, that sort of gives you a focal point for who you think you are. So you race off in that direction with this in tow, and that becomes your life reference. And off you go. So it's quite sensible. So the will aligns itself with the perception and follows that path. Okay, so the will aligns itself with a virtual self in any context. In other words, he projects a virtual self, and everything is about becoming who is projected as himself up here. These are ideas and good things. Oh, I might do this stuff. Oh, I've decided to do that. Yeah. Or I've decided to hook up here and, you know, become a yogi. Sit on my ass. So 3 planes form a triangle within which we live and have our being. Obviously, there it is. You can't deny it. So each triangle expanding from the heart is a plane of consciousness. So he thinks if I go in this direction, as he goes further along, then more experiences get added to that. So this becomes his reality. So he's trapped in the triangle from another different point of view. It's pretty bad. Okay, so it's much like a pyramid. Like if we imagine 4 of these and lay them, drop the sides down, you'll have a pyramid. So it becomes a pyramid. And so we're trapped in this pyramid of energy. Right? So we should realize that our attachments are inseparable from that which defines them. We must see that all pain is due to attachment. In reaching this conclusion, we'll see that to let go is to allow them to fall inward. For each and every one of them came out of the heart. The energy that drives these lines, that builds the prison, comes out of your desire to instantiate yourself as an individual being that's or project yourself, that is. Yeah? You want to be Ben or Bill or Jill or Jack or Connie. Yeah. Maybe you're conning yourself. Okay, so again, we're back with this. They form a triangle. Again, so now what I've done here is laid big triangles over the small ones. So they're not only layered this way, they're also layered and stacked on top of us to infinity in every direction. And there's no way out. So it's like, it's a diabolical trap. And you can't get out of it, and it's very depressing if you think that, but I'm going to get you out of it. So here we go. Again, we're back with blah, blah. So, okay, let's remove the triangle. Just look at this. Beyond the three modes or bodies, there's this. And if we remove the desire to go away from the heart, then all these triangles disappear as well. We're not trying to be this way or that way. We're not trying to be more negative, more positive, or fix this. This is the wheel of karma, by the way. So we go to the heart. We forget about this and say, all right, who decided to do this? It wasn't you, it was God, because the self is God. The ego can't decide to do it because he hasn't got a decision. He's got no will, right? He reacts. That's all he does. So in this case, God's giving you the desire to go back to yourself. And that's what happens. The triangle disappears, and then this whole out thing out here disappears too. So each outward facing triangle signifies an intention toward an outcome, right? So you try and you create an outcome which creates the paradigm which traps you. Again, so in the heart, heart-centered, be heart-centered, Buddha said. So, should the day come when all your attachments are gone, when the entire structure is resolved, nothing will exist to triangulate or position a you. So I'll read that again. Nothing will exist to triangulate or position a you as being or existing. You will then see that you are truly infinite consciousness. Because it's this triangulation paradigm that creates a you that traps you. Whatever triangulates you creates a you, and you're trapped in your own trap. If you listen to Alan Watts, he's always talking about being trapped in his own trap. You can find Alan Watts on YouTube. There's hundreds of videos. He's an incredible man. Died, I think, in the late 20s, 1920s, 30 maybe? I don't know, somewhere around there. Anyway, very smart man. So the three planes collapse along with the force that created them. That's what happens. Bang, gone. Okay, so now this is the beauty. Now, you'll see here in the middle, we've got zero up here. This is zero here. Now, to know what zero is, you have to know what -1 and 1 is. Now, these are like eyes, like I'm more negative or more positive, right? Or I'm zeroed, I'm balanced. So, to get -2, you need -1 and -3. And the whole thing is infinite, linearly, in both directions. So to get 1, you need 0 and 2. To get 2, you need 3 and 1. See that? So to get 4, you need 3 and 5, right? To get 5, you need 4 and 6. And that's infinite. And no matter what direction you go in to try and get away from that paradigm, you still need the preceding numbers and the ones before in order to build up the reality that you want to go into. So what I've got here is an expression that directs the attention toward how to understand infinity. It's not linear like these numbers signify, because 0 isn't a number. It's a sphere. It's a concept. In other words, it can be anything. And it's empty, which means it can contain anything. So starting from 0, if we say there's -1 and 1, then 0 is 0. But if we start from 1, meaning the position I want, or the 0 point, then 1 also becomes 0, because that position where we've designated 0 and the position where we've designated 2 yields the result, which is 1. But in context of the 1, meaning the position, it's 0. That's the 0 position in context of 1. And every number then becomes 0. Not just lineal, but every number in vectors away from these circles, or they're spheres actually, any position in vector terms away from this center is zero. So no matter which point you talk about or point at or thing you point at or think about, it's still the 0 point. Now, if you understand this properly, you can understand how the whole universe manifests out of a single particle, or the Higgs boson, or whatever you want to call it. This describes it very, very well. Okay, so as you can see, the series is infinite and dependent upon number itself. This is a lineal description of reality. However, reality is not linear at all. It's multidimensional. And that means it expands in every direction at once. So it means that those lights in these people's heads is one light, and it's manifesting everything out of itself. Now that's a Higgs boson. It's present everywhere at once. How big it is, who knows? It could be infinitesimally small, but that's like big, small. Small, big. In relation to what? To itself? There's no balance. Rather, there's no reference to make, because there's only one, and if it's infinitely small or infinitely big, it's the same thing. It's identical. Two ends of the same stick. But if you throw the stick away, you chuck away the stick, what have you got? Nothing, which is 0. So there it is. Mathematical enlightenment. By number. Now if you see each point, each number shining, rather, if you see it has connotations to every other number, then it's like it's shining. And there. We had a bit of a glitch in the hardware, but never mind, can't ruin this video. We're moving on. Plug in a stronger charger. Okay, so if you're getting bored, you can, watch it a bit more later. You can watch it forever if you want. It's a video. Okay, here we go. So this and the following slides present a definition of infinity. Okay, so that's how it's shining, like that. This pointer here, that's the reference we've made to the original Bindu over there. Right? So he's projected along a vector and he's over there now, or he's up there in a cluster of different people, different beings. All of these are different universes or realities. But if you see this vector here, in contrast to that, we could create a vector from this line going over there and then whatever. So it's all interrelated, like the numbers are all referring to each other. Okay, it's a pretty good rendition of how presence radiates, how consciousness is present everywhere. How here, I'm here talking and filming this, but there's no here, because the here is this infinite point. Everyone is right here now. India's here. Alpha Centauri is right here in me, in this self. The self knows itself and is conscious of itself as the infinite. Something like that. Sphere over here shining. Okay, so here we go, a yogic explanation of the triplicit nature of human consciousness, and there it is. Okay, so, bang, there it goes. It's incredible. Okay, if we take that each ray is composed of points of light, then the above can be taken to be one of those points of light. This guy here, shining infinitely in every direction at once. Each sphere of light consciousness is thus present everywhere at once. There's really only one. One being, one self, one Atman. The Atman isn't a form, it's that sphere. Reference to the Bindu. If you read a book called the Tirumantiram, you'll find reference to Atman as a sphere, as a Bindu, not as a form. The form of Atman or God is projected by the ego upon this sphere to give reference to the psychological being who's looking at it. For example, it defines my me that I think I'm created by God because I can't create myself because I don't exist. So the mind / conscious self of the ego, which isn't, rather, it's not conscious, the wrong way to put it. The mind has this ability, because of the mechanism of consciousness that's in it, to construct its best guess as to who this self is, because it is conscious, obviously. So it constructs a God being. But it's the bindu. The bindu is what's conscious. It's an infinite point of consciousness that's conscious of everything on every line. You could say God is this sphere. Okay, so the quantum field, that's this. Here's one version of himself. The universe is seen from that point of view as a totally different universe than every other. E.g., you have a different life than me, fish have a different life than cats. So each universe is separate to all intents and purposes, but it isn't. Okay, so that's the end of that. Hope you enjoyed it. So we ask, who saw this? Who is paying attention to it? Who knows? I don't. I just know that I'm, this invisible, unknowable that doesn't know anything. But it knows. Thank you. Hope you enjoyed it. Bye.